Hey guys, it's Khalil,
Hey, it's Jed.
and we are the Marshals of Truth. Starting our whatever episode this is, I'm not even counting at this point. Um, we are going to talk about the benefits of liberalism. Going very explicitly, just listing off the things that you get from a liberalist society that you know every person ideally in their brain really wants. So the first is that there's free press, very different than a lot of the US's adversaries and their allies, adversaries around the world, is that they don't really accept the free press, and they censor many things like Chinese propaganda, Russian propaganda, you know, like the Taliban doesn't even have, media because they know that it's just too much of an opportunity to get their people to think against the emirate.
They
And
might have a
so
Twitter account.
I guess they have a Twitter account, yeah. So yeah, exactly. It's in a liberalist society, there's a free press, ideally
Yeah,
no censorship, and there's no authoritarian clampdown on personal identity, ideally. In the sense that there may be a certain identity about you that is minority, that but it's not going to be like it's not going to be exploited as it would in a totalitarian society, and where the leader or leaders of your country want to create a certain amount of ethnic or cultural purity, and you are the exception and you must be eradicated for the benefit of the whole. you know in a liberal society, all differences are ideally accepted, and that people just live together and live as part of the collective culture of America, or culture of Britain, or culture of France or Germany or whatever, or Italy, or Spain even, or Canada. So that is the ideally how a liberal society would function, out of the idea that freedom best secures peace, lining up with a quote from you know who. Um, According to Alan Ryan, author of On Politics, Hegel's philosophy of history was a work in which, quote, his view of the nature and purpose of the modern legal. Oh, wait, we already used this quote. Anyway, but yeah, basically it's if you remember what that quote was, and the quote being like the idea that purpose of order is to bring about freedom, then that is what a liberal person, like a person that accepts liberal ideals. I'm not talking about a modern, American left person. I'm talking about like the people that accept liberal democracy. They
yeah,
believe that the purpose of order is to bring about freedom, you know.
exactly. The basis of liberal systems like the United States is the social contract, which once again we've described in great detail, but summarized, it's the deal that we make with to the people who we elect and the people who rule over us. That if we give them some of our freedoms, we give them, we give them some of our freedoms in order that they will both protect and give us order in our societies. We'll have peace, we'll have law, things to kind of keep others from hurting us. They'll give us that peace, and they'll also give us back some of that freedom which is intrinsic to our human nature. We give them peace, we give them some of that freedom. They give us peace, and ideally, they give us that freedom back. And that's the basis of liberal societies, is that they do both. They give freedom. They accept freedom of people to be, usually to act, to have independence in, some say like the financial decisions they make, the people they marry, how many children they have, what car they can buy. You have the freedom and the independence to do those things as long as you still respect the authority of the government or respect the authority of the law, of which the government upholds and protects. So yeah, that's the basis of liberal society is that social contract. And so with that, you get the purpose of the peace, you give the purpose of order in the society, once again, is to bring back that freedom in a limited sense that we had when humanity was first born.
Right, because in a liberal society, they bring forth, as we're going to mention, as I think to a certain extent we've already mentioned, is that it does balance peace and freedom better than any other system ever before. It has, ideally in a liberal society, you would have the means of peace, you would have a strong legal system that's just and that operates fairly, but then you would also and then you would also have like a strong military to ward off from those that want to take away that nation's freedom and the people's freedom. Um, but then you'd also have enough freedom, that you'd be able to speak against the government and advocate for it to be better, without being a traitor and saying that the nation shouldn't exist at all. You have the ability to change it, but not get rid of it in its entirety. And that's a perfectly acceptable thing for many Americans and many of those that live within liberal societies to accept. That you're not supposed to say down with America. You're supposed to say, I want to make America better. So um, that's the
Yeah,
interesting thing about liberal societies is that because of that in natural patriotism that comes from a society and where they know that they can make a change, they know and it's their obligation to make change, that it's resilient. That attempts to get rid of their freedom, like coup attempts, they cannot work in the same way that it would in a despotic dictatorship, because the people want the freedom that comes from a liberal society, and that's proof that it works.
exactly. Um, to first, we like to describe how coups can't work on a institutional level. We described again that the patriotism that freedom inspires, that the freedom to change your government, the freedom to vote out people you don't like, that inspires a patriotism that wants you to keep your country alive and keep your country surviving and not overthrow the whole system. That makes liberalism resilient in and of itself. But on top of that, liberal societies also have a lot of institutional safeguards in order to keep despotic leaders, tyrannical leaders from taking control or Senate from taking too much control, all that kind of stuff. The big way you get that is through the idea of checks and balances. So in essence, this is an idea in which various branches or levels of government can stop the other another level of government from overextending its power or staying in a position too long or making decisions that go against the spirit of the country, go against the founding principles of a country. United States, that would be, taking out laws that are unconstitutional, that don't fall in line with the Constitution that founded our great nation. So, we have various ways that different legislatures or different bodies of government can regulate another. And so, one of the ways that a liberal system that we have described in, like previously, the United Kingdom, is the idea of a no confidence vote. And so essentially what this is that in Britain, if the legislature, if the assembly or anything like that, if they don't trust the government, they don't trust the prime minister, their cabinet, anything like that, they could hold themselves to a vote. They can say that we do not trust this government to be upholding, the will of the people, and so we want to remove them. They could hold a vote, a no confidence vote. And if that vote wins, then the people in the current government have to step down. Usually the legislature, they will try to find a provisional government in order to replace them, but down the line, general elections will be held, new leaders will be elected, just like any sort of liberal system. But this is a level in which the legislature has a check on the executive level of leadership that could stop a, say, the prime minister, like a demagogue prime minister or a tyrannical prime minister from doing way too much. And yeah, that's one of the examples that you could get like that. You could get in a liberal system. And this, again, this is just an example for the United Kingdom. We'll describe the US too.
Right. The institutions meant to hold back demagogues and those that would want to take over liberal democratic countries, they have a lot of things getting in their way. Essentially liberal democracy, like a boxer in the last round of a fight, 10, 12 rounds into a fight, like Rocky fights, like Rocky 4. It's like Rocky, in Rocky 4 fighting Drago. It's like liberal democracy holds on and it wins out because they like to take down a liberal democracy, and there's actually a clip from The Crown, that we're going to have in the description. Credit to Netflix, credit to the people that made the show, but it's a 2 to 3 minute clip of Lord Mountbatten, you know, a lord in the Parliament of Great Britain at the time, and others that wanted to collude with him about the possibility of a coup in the UK against the existing authority, um, to enact its will, I believe. And I haven't watched The Crown, but I believe it might have been to maintain the authority of the British Empire. So anyway, Lord Mountbatten in this clip was explaining, the history of coups, recent coups, since decolonization in Africa, and about how they were so easy because they didn't have institutions, they didn't have long-lasting institutions, and so he was explaining all the things that would have to be done to have a successful coup in Britain, and he listed the following: loyalty of police, army, the courts, the media, control of entry and exit from the country, so control of all the borders and the airports all across the country, in parliament, as was described, in the video that we're going to put in the description. So having all these requirements for a successful coup in a liberal society make the idea of a coup in Britain or any liberal democracy um, as impossible. It makes the idea of even thinking about it make no sense. That's why January 6th it was scary, and it could have worked, maybe theoretically, but the amount of hoops you'd have to jump through in an organized, institutionalized liberal democracy, is just insane. And that's why no one in their right mind would even try.
Exactly. That's one of the benefits of a mixed government, a mixed system like a liberal democracy, in which there's so many elements, not just in the government, but that influence the people, which influence the government, that makes coups like impossible. Say a bunch of parliament members overthrew, killed the prime minister, and one of them put themselves as a leader. Okay, a parliament just does a no confidence vote, they're out of office. And that's just on an institutional level. They don't have the support of the people. They get voted out. They get stormed. The police will take them out of service. The army will take them out. Or people just won't accept the authority of whatever leader they put in. That's on the personal level. There's so many, as I said, so many hoops to jump through in order to not just overthrow a leader, but to stay in power, that in a liberal system, it's impossible. Of course, you get this in dictatorial countries like Iraq or Syria, in which you have various different leaders who vie for power, who have assemblies who are basically just their pawns. When they go, the parliament usually goes. Everyone with that. There's no way that the people are usually even involved at all unless they're just on the side of one of those warring parties. They just take over. It's not really any checks or balances to really check that. And so you get those, you know, 18 different governments in these new countries which never last for like a year. We'll come to describe some of those later on. But it just doesn't work in a liberal system. And again, I just want to take another point to describe just some of the institutional level ways in which coups or power grabs really can't work in liberal systems because of how many elements to them there are. So for the United States, we have, just like the United Kingdom, a system of checks and balances, one that kind of goes a long way and how many like of each branch could stop each other. So in the United States, we have the legislative branch. That's Congress, the House and the Senate. So they have the right to make laws, but those laws can get vetoed by the president, ex the executive power, or those laws can be ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. That's the judicial branch. So basically, say if the everyone in the Senate decided that they wanted to pass a law to make it that everyone can only have one baby or something like that. Then, one, the president could just not sign that into law, first of all, then nothing happens. Or, if somehow the president did sign it into law, maybe he was on board, the Supreme Court could look at that law and determine that it's unconstitutional, that it goes against our ideas of, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. I'm pretty sure that violates a lot of amendments too. But you could decide, they would decide that it's unconstitutional. Law doesn't go into effect. They can't grab that power. On another level, so you have the executive branch, the president, they can sign or not sign laws. They could pass executive orders, but those executive orders, again, can get ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, or the president, if the legislator doesn't appreciate them, if they feel like they've violated a law, they've done something wrong, or they just don't like the president, they can vote him out. They can impeach him and remove him from office. And in the United States, it's a two-step process, um, in which the House and the Senate must vote to impeach the president. The House must vote to impeach the president, and then the Senate has to vote to remove him. Or it's two steps, as opposed to the United Kingdom, in which the no confidence will just remove them. Um, and then you have the judicial branch, which that's the Supreme Court, as I talked about before. It could decide which laws are unconstitutional or not. Um, but the amount of judges and who's on the court can be changed by the legislative branch. Congress can decide how many judges are on the court. And they could also impeach them if they violated a law or something, some sort of statute that they don't feel like they are right to serve on the court. Um, Again, oh, and also on top of that, the legislative branch can add amendments to the Constitution. So say the Supreme Court decided that a law is unconstitutional. The Congress could just make an amendment that says that this law is constitutional. The Supreme Court can't do anything about that. Um, yeah. So once again, institutional wise, and this is ignoring all the factors that a populace, that the media, the police, all these loyalties need to have in a liberal system to back some sort of coup. This ignoring all that, just institutional wise, it's very, very difficult for a tyrannical leader or a tyrannical Senate or a tyrannical Supreme Court, ideally, to make a power grab and become, a power that can't be removed. Unfortunately, in reality, it gets a little muddy, as we've seen recently. But institutional wise, it's very, very difficult to, have a dictator in the United States.
Ideally, you'd make it so hard to take. You'd make it easier to conquer the entire world and bring world peace than to take over a liberal democracy. Ideally, a liberal democracy would be so resilient and so strong that um, that you could not take it over from within. That it would be you might as well be, you know, trying to make it to hell and back, you know, because it's supposed to be impossible. That's the whole point of an established democracy. But there are examples of not established democracy, of democracies that are new, that didn't have enough time to come up with the good institutions to keep it together, and didn't gather enough time in its existence to gain the loyalty of the people. And so therefore dictators took control and nationalism flourished and the rule of law. really took the back seat. And there are multiple examples of this. Like, I'm just going to list off a few countries and dictators. There was Portugal with Salazar, Spain with Francisco Franco, Romania with Ion Antonescu, Germany with Hitler, of course, Italy with Mussolini, Greece even with Metaxas, Poland with Josip Pilsudski, Hungary today with Orban, Russia today with Putin, and Pakistan almost every leader that has ever ruled it, because no one leader lasted their whole term ever in Pakistan. All either lost to votes of no confidence, were thrown out in coups, or were executed. So there is Brazil with Bolsonaro right now taking over a democracy. Venezuela, both with Hugo Chavez and right now with Maduro. Turkey with Erdogan, and China after they in the White Ping Revolution in 1911, China actually tried its first ever style of the Western style democracy in 1911, 1912, and the Western educated public official, the popular official Sun Yat-sen was to be the first president of China, but then he was overthrown by General Yuan Shikai in a military coup, and essentially de-democratized China over the next 4 to 5 years, leading into the instability that over the next 2, 3 decades would finally lead to the rule of the CCP, instituting and bringing forth chaos. And that was all because that democracy that had been established in China for even those first few months, did not have enough backing, did not have enough institutions built, and um, um, enough control over their army and enough loyalty of their people, just didn't have enough time to foster that. And so when General Yuan Shikai came in with his army, and staged a military coup, democracy in China was all but done.
Yeah. And so this, like I said, this is what happens when they don't have the institutions to stop these coups from really flourishing, or stop these revolutions, or stop these dictators from taking over power. And then this brings up a potential problem that sometimes liberal or mixed governments have, in which the system can be corrupted. Because we've talked about liberalism has a lot of checks and balances that ideally will work very, very well in stopping a dictator, or an overbearing Senate, or a crazy judicial branch from going against the will of the people, or trying to put someone in power who will rule over the whole country. As we said, majority of the times in established democracies like the United States or the United Kingdom, these dictators do not exist. They don't last. Um, However, sometimes it can get close. And that happens usually when these mixed governments can get kind of corrupted, or usurped, or just ignored. We'll have like some bigger examples like way later on in the series, but some closer ones could be, January 6th. And we've talked about this a lot. But it's an example of, in one aspect, the populace trying to ignore all of the institutional levels that were to stop a dictator, or someone, in this case Donald Trump, from accepting the election results. Ignored the will of the state, and tried to just straight up overthrow the entire government. You would have to think that even if they were to put someone as a leader, they would not have the approval of all of Congress or whoever survived, and they would probably just get impeached, thrown out through some port. Once again, it just shows how many aspects come with a liberal democracy, if not just the institutions, but the loyalty of the entire nation. I mean, the US is 330 million people. To think that everyone would go along with the crowd of a thousand or so people who stormed the Capitol, and who could have potentially, put in some new government if they really wanted to, the people would not have the loyalty of that. And to think that even the senators, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, who would have survived that, were to go along with this new instituted fake government is ridiculous. And again, once again, we have the institutions inside of the mixed government that could stop these leaders from coming in. But sometimes when the threat comes from outside of those institutions, it can be worrisome.
Yeah, that's why it's liberal democracies are very strong, but you live in one for long enough and you observe the politics, the domestic politics of a liberal democracy, and you can see the flaws that it has. Like the power of the Supreme Court we have seen over the past few weeks, and people, don't know what to do with that. They don't know, they haven't quite needed to deal with in the same way as is right now. Many people are thinking in ways that they haven't thought before about, how seemingly uncheckable of a power that the Supreme Court is. They're thinking like about how they can again not take over, not like trying to down with America. That's not what people want. The people that are complaining about the seeming uncheckable power of the Supreme Court want to change America. They don't want it to be wiped off the face of the earth.
Yeah. Reforms. How can we fix a system that, in it how it stands, can't really be changed by the populace? The Supreme Court of the United States is not elected. It is not on the November ballot that everyone gets to vote for. Supreme Court justices are picked by the president and then are voted in by the Senate. It's another level of checks and balances in that the president can't just put a bunch of people onto the Supreme Court who they want without the legislature. However, that's inside the government. The people outside of government, the populace, the American people, don't have a say in that. We don't, like I said, we don't vote for our Supreme Court justices, and we also can't impeach them. We can't remove them from office. The legislature can, but we can't. And so we get to ask ourselves the question, what do we do when the power that we've trusted to be stable, to be secure, to be not really wavering, every other year, because that's the premise of the Supreme Court. The reason that they didn't make it an elected position is that the founders wanted an institution that is separate from all the quarrels and conflicts of politics, of people voting, of corruption, in that ideally the professionals would be chosen by the president, voted in by the legislature, and that they would just do their job of just interpreting the Constitution. However, what we've seen happen in the past 10, 20, 30, 40 years is a weaponization of the system in which primarily conservative presidents have put in increasingly conservative judges. I mean, usually when you have a president, they put in judges who follow along their same political position. But a weaponization of this in which presidents will put in as many Supreme Court justices as they can to basically pack the court in that so that the court can do what basically um the political bidding of whatever party put him in. And in this case, it was the Republicans. Donald Trump, over his 4-year term, had the chance to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. That's almost unheard of. Usually it's like 1 or 2 because, say, a Supreme Court justice will retire or they'll die of old age. You serve until, you retire or you die. And you won't get more than 1 or 2. I think Obama had just 1 and then another attempted that didn't go through. Donald Trump had 3, and 3 justices that were very, very conservative and also very young. And so these people who are on the Supreme Court are going to be on the Supreme Court for decades and decades to come. And now, how the Supreme Court stands, it is very ideologically slanted towards conservative. It's about a 6-3 conservative versus liberal split, the 6 being the conservative. 3 of those appointed in the last 4 or 5 years, basically, under the term of Trump. And so this is what happens when an uncheckable power, in which is usually trusted that it will just do its job, can be checked by the legislature if it wants to, but is separate from all these systems, gets corrupted. And that's another worry. That's a worrisome thing for liberal democracies, like the United States.
Yeah. So linking over back to our comparison with China, um, we want to look at aspects of Chinese law and how they crack down on dissent, and America's history of cracking down on dissent, and really just like how and really being fair about the comparison, but then also, um, being equally fair in the sense of, looking at the circumstances of either of each particular action and the response to it and the reason for it, and by the end of it, we hope to also make the point, you know, through the logic of common sense that America's crackdowns on protests have been through the Chad, how do I best put this? It's like
They
they were
have been
done.
done through, I would argue, necessity, and we'll kind of show it. It's an argument you kind of had to stretch, but what you see is a difference in intention, of which in liberal democracy protests are, stamped down upon, as opposed to authoritarian regimes such as China, and why they do this. Um, just to start off, it's a hallmark of liberal democracy to have the freedom to protest, the right to oppose the government, say that they need to change something, go out in the streets, picket, all that kind of stuff. It's a hallmark for that. United States, we had our civil rights movements. We had protests for um, like marriage rights and gender equality, health care. All of these things were fought through protests. And of course, there were crackdowns upon them. We kind of display that. But a huge difference in these crackdowns was one, the intention, and two, also was the effect. They were really different on what actually came out of them. And we'll try to explain them in kind of what we have in the time we got left.
Right. The first comparison is the Kent State shootings, and the response to the Kent State protests against the Vietnam War in 1970 versus the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. In the Kent State shootings, there was a protest of over 300 people on the campus. The National Guard was called, and after the protest was went uncontrolled for days, um, about 25, 30, I think it was 28 guardsmen opened fire into the crowd and killed four, um, while no protesters were armed. And so this was a moment that sparked great outrage within the country, just for protesting the war on their campus. A relatively small number of protesters, only a little over 300, and the National Guard was declared, and then killing four of them. It was a big moment for America. But Tiananmen Square, in comparison, was much larger. It was a group of, I believe, up to 1 million people in the capital of China in Beijing, um, protesting the slide back of democracy in China and the inability of college and university students and students in general, like intellectuals, to be able to reform the CCP, not necessarily take it down, just to reform it, to be able to allow for more freedom and hopefully for the further benefit of China and the Chinese people. And the crackdown for this was severe. Um, it was a long, drawn out affair, over multiple weeks and I believe even months of people camping and staying in their own perimeter around Tiananmen Square, which was the place where, within actually, I believe, um, less than a mile, like very, very short distance away from the building in which the Politburo was supposed to meet, um, in the CCP. Um, and finally, after months of protest, and even um, viewing, international media making their way to Beijing to videotape and to record these events, um, the PLA was called up. They mobilized their forces and organize um, the perimeter around the protesters as if they were engaging in a literal military operation against a foreign hostile force. Um, they just squeezed the people in, and um, they hoped to disperse everybody, but there was just a point where they were just straight up spraying and killing people. And I believe, hundreds of people died, and I believe many more hundreds were injured.
Yeah, we don't know the
Being
official
as young as
figures, of
these
course.
people being as young as 18, 19 years old, and from what I've heard, very few were over the age of 25. So these were very young people in the hundreds of thousands, just going on hunger strikes for weeks, protesting their government. And it was a travesty.
Yeah. And so we wanted to highlight how, crackdowns exist in both liberal democracies and authoritarian regimes. However, the difference in intention and the difference in impact is very, very obvious. China did this able uh, to crack down on a democratic protest and resulted in the just straight up killing of hundreds, if not thousands, of people in order to just eliminate this movement altogether. And it was followed up by many, finding protesters, arresting them, and just killing the movement altogether. Kent State, you could argue, I'm sure the police officers say that it was out of self defense or something like that, but it was not done with the intention of killing all the people, or else we would have had more than, of course, 4 people dead. So, again, a big difference in how liberal societies respect the right to protest as opposed to authoritarian regimes. With that, that's